Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I have a lot of people who like to challenge the Cantillon essay, and for some reason they like to ask me and challenge me and argue with me about it, even though I didn't write the essay. I just like referring back to it because I find that a lot of the economic forces that were taking place back in the 1700s are still playing out today. And if you can recognize them, well, then you can probably predict a lot of what's going to happen into the future just by simply understanding what was written down in that essay, 200 years ago. However, so many people say, like, this thing doesn't play out today. You got to disregard a lot of this stuff. And for example, I got this email today from a gentleman who is telling me that the Cantillon essay is challenged here, and I thought I would read it to you guys and kind of give you my response to it. So it goes like this. Listening to you reading the Cantillon essay a few days ago, I don't agree with your conclusion about the U.S. heading into extreme poverty. The Romans traded metals for luxuries. The U.S. is the world's biggest exporter of food. If the U.S. stopped exporting food, famine would hit a lot of countries. A lot of countries' stability comes from the trading of U.S. luxuries in exchange for food stability. Luxury price will have to come down versus the cost of food because of the high level of consumer debt. That is my take on the situation. Brent. Well, thank you, Brent. I really appreciate you taking the time to send me this email. Now, again, this isn't my essay. I didn't write it. It's just one that I have taken into, some serious consideration, considering some of these economic forces that are taking place. Now, the first thing I have to think of is the Romans traded metals for luxuries. Now, yes, no, okay, this is what ended up happening, right, is that the Romans at some point had created such an empire that they had to go on the war path in order to continue to bring in new money into the system. As they were bringing this new money into the system, they had a situation in which that there was not enough gold and silver and all that to do commerce, right? So they started using steel. The steel coins were taken out of circulation because people found that they could take the steel and make useful items out of it. So they took this steel and tainted it with vinegar, right? This is all written down in Cantillon's essay, by the way. I didn't bring the essay. I probably should have read this part of it for you guys. But then they took the steel and they tainted it with vinegar. Now there's a situation in which that this money could only be used for money, the steel, right? But outsiders, foreigners, figured it out that if they found a nice iron supply, that they could create their own steel coins that look just like the Romans' coins, and they could go in there and buy up all the Roman commodities. So they tainted their own steel, made it a fiat currency, and then ruined their own empire by doing it, or damaged their empire by doing it. So that's really what you have to think about when it came to the Romans and what happened with their money. It wasn't like it was just an simple, they ran out of gold by, buying up all these foreign production. I mean, they literally screwed themselves up with it. But anyway, moving on. The U.S. is the world's biggest exporter of food. Yeah. Well, they're the largest. It's kind of funny how to think about that, because there are other nations who produce more food, like on a tonnage basis, like there's more food that is produced in India, China, stuff like that. But the United States produces more food per capita, right? So we grow and produce an abundance amount of food. Now, again, yes, we are an exporter of food, but we're also an importer of food for variety. So it's not like we produce all the food that we need, right? Because we do need variety of food. We just produce such an abundance of the food that we do produce that it's way beyond what any other nation does. So I do agree with it, but it's not exactly that simple, right? It's not like we can just turn off the importing of the food that we have and expect all the varieties of food that we typically would get. That's not the way it's working, right? So yes, we are a huge exporter of food and producer of food. Goes on to say here, if the U.S. stopped exporting food, famine would hit a lot of countries. I absolutely agree with that. Because we produce such an abundance of food and export that abundance, the nations around the world who do not produce enough food for themselves would definitely feel the impacts of it. And because food is priced in dollars around the world, then the demand for dollars would need to be there in order to produce the food. If the food was not being produced in the U.S. and being exported out there, people would begin to starve. I totally agree with that. A lot of countries' stability comes from the trading of U.S. luxuries in exchange for stability. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, right? Because it's not just luxuries that we import a lot of necessities as well. And so you have to like think about that. Like if we are not importing like not just the luxuries for food but the necessities for food, we're also not exporting that food to those people. So we need imports as much as we export the stuff that we have. Now, could we be self-sufficient? Not really, right? I mean, yeah, we have the capabilities, we have the commodities, the natural resources, all the know-how and power, but to have it turn off immediately and expect us to have like the capabilities of being able to produce for ourselves, it's not going to be like that, not at all. So we definitely need other countries to trade us some of the necessities that we have within our nation in order to produce the food and in order to distribute it out there. So this is turning into a very symbiotic relationship when you think about it. Like we need people to lend us money, right? In order for us to buy the commodities, buy the stuff, buy the things that are out there, in order for us to have an economy here in the United States in order to produce the food that we distribute out there to the world. Now, if it didn't work out like that, we weren't able to borrow money from the rest of the world, right? What would end up happening? Well, if we could not borrow money from the rest of the world, this is like the U.S. Treasury issuance going out to the world. Think about it like that. Because if the U.S. Treasury issuance did not have a demand for it, then what would end up happening is the price of that U.S. Treasury would fall, right? And then what would happen is the interest rates would rise. Now we have to think this is because the people don't want our money anymore. They don't want our dollar anymore. They're done with us. Forget it, right? And even like, I don't know, maybe they figured out a way to get food from someplace else, right? I don't know. But we're trying to take on this scenario in which that there's going to be like no new money coming into the system because that's where the new money comes from. Well, if this new money doesn't come into the system from the debt issuance, like the people around the world, nobody's buying this debt, interest rates are going through the roof, bond prices are falling. Well, what ends up happening is that debt issuance inside of the United States and probably around the world as well, but the problem will be within the United States is that the debt issuance to invest within the farming industry, right? In order to produce the food, it comes from debt issuance. And it doesn't come from cash. Like there could be somebody out there with a hoe, farming, hey, I'm a farmer, I'm going to produce as much food as I want. That's cool. But if you're going to produce food on a major, large scale, it comes from debt issuance. But if the U.S. debt is not being sold, right, and the interest rates are rising and the bond prices are falling, then the debt issuance going in, the investment going into farming would deplete and there would be less food being produced. So yeah, I totally agree that if the U.S. stopped producing and exporting food, famine would hit a lot of countries, including this one, because the little food that is left over from the lack of investment going into farming would have a super high demand outside of the United States, and they would be paying top dollar for it. So if they're paying top dollar for it outside of the United States, they'd be paying top dollar for it inside the United States. How all this is supposed to play out when the demand for dollar doesn't exist is beyond me. So I know a lot of people think about the dollar being tied to like oil. Yeah, we eat oil. We live off of oil. Oil is the commodity that makes the world go round, right? But you think about it, there is no other item out there that will drive people to absolute craziness if they do not have it, like food, right? So yeah, I mean, that's my take on this whole thing. Like, I agree that the essay can be challenged with the idea of like food being a major commodity around the world as opposed to like, say, oil, and that the demand for food would drive the people into the dollar in order to acquire the food. My only argument after that would be that the production of food around the world would then get quite extreme, as the high value of food would then cause the investment into other nations' production of food till it eventually forced the United States out of the food production, and then we would be in total loss because nobody would really want anything to do with us at that point. So no matter what, I still see it as a failure, right? No matter how you look at it. All right. Uneducated economist. I got to go back to work. You guys let me know.